executing this covenant, I'm going to use again a sort of a catchphrase, call it cliche if you want, is that a new type of e-governance. This has got nothing to do with using information technology. I'm talking about e-governance, which starts with all E's: engagement, encouragement, empowerment, employment, entrepreneurship. There are 5-6 things that come to mind immediately. First amongst which is engagement. Engagement with people. Get back the confidence, get back the communication going between yourselves and the people. So the first thing is engagement. The second one, as part of the engagement. Now, engagement per se doesn't mean anything. So let me put a few actions. What do I mean by engagement? Firstly, compensation. People who've been injured in the various agitation, the large number of people who were blinded because of the pellet guns, the large number of people who had bullet wounds through a stray bullet. Maybe nobody shot at them with any intent, but as a byproduct of the agitation, a lot of bystanders also get injured. But injured they are, and they may well be the breadwinners of the family. The other compensation is the flood victims of 2014. Sadly, that compensation has not been paid fully even now. And I'm told, and I hope I'm wrong, that those who have been paid that compensation has been so paltry that people have even refused that. Now, what can be worse than this? If that is true, then the writing is on the wall. Obviously, the government needs to do a little more. And like I mentioned a while ago, what about the people who of the other regions who have also suffered for no fault of theirs? Those injured in Pakistani firing across the border, those whose houses have been damaged because of mortar firing and artillery shelling along the Punch-Rajouri, that entire belt. Fortunately, there is not so much damage in the valley along the line of control because there is no population that lives so close to the line of control. And the army is in full command there, and therefore there is very little that Pakistani can do there except to try and infiltrate. So the compensation is one aspect which will immediately engage government with people who need that engagement immediately. Another aspect of engagement is, I think, equally, if not more important, and that is, as part of reaching out to people, one of the things that the government, I recommend, should do as early as possible is to release detainees who have been detained for charges, minor charges. And a very large number of young people are today under detention in this category. If the government could release them, I think it would generate immense goodwill. And let us say, even if for those who fear that once released these people will go back into the agitation stream, that percentage, let me assure you from experience, would be small. And compared to the large goodwill that it would generate, it is something that can be easily ignored. So releasing of people who are under detention for minor issues should receive government's immediate attention. The other part is that we must look at possibilities of encouragement. How do you encourage people to come forward and say your piece, we are listening? How do you do this? This is what needs to be done at the grassroots level by the political leadership. Because at the end of it all, we are a democracy, and political leadership must call the shots. Fortunately, we are not like our neighbor on the west, where somebody else calls the shots and somebody else is in the front. And we pride ourselves on that. So therefore, this is something that we need to do. When we talk about empowerment, I can suggest one very quick way of empowerment, and that is hold Gram Panchayat elections. They were held earlier, and you'll be quite happy to know that the response to those elections were overwhelming. If I'm not mistaken, it was in excess of 84% voter turnout. So look at the enthusiasm people have for grassroots democracy, or let's say the local bodies which govern, or which take the governance right down to the grassroots level. So the next part is this Gram Panchayat election. If you can hold them, and having held them, empower them. Let's correct the mistake that was committed earlier. Last time, in excess of 35,000 panches meaning the members of the Gram Panchayat, those people were all elected and they were raring to go, but there was no financial empowerment. Funds were not allocated, and therefore they were a Gram Panchayat only in the name. Let's correct that. I would even go to an extent of putting a timeline on it. Whenever you hold the Gram Panchayat elections, and earlier the better, within 90 days, the empowerment must be seen. And this is not something outlandish. This is something which is so simple. And we're talking about the other type of e-governance. It should be a matter of only a transaction, an e-transaction. Once the money reaches the grassroots level, you will find things will start, the development will start at the grassroots level. That is where it is required at the moment. The other development must also take place, the larger projects and so on and so forth. So empowerment, I gave you one example, there will be several other ways of empowerment. Even if, let me add, I'm not a political person, but let us say, if the chances are that if you hold the Gram Panchayat elections today, the anti-incumbency factor may operate, and not many people from the present dispensation would get elected, so be it. People will never forget that the initiative was taken by this government. So to that extent, the government must have that much confidence to say, it doesn't matter. What matters is our long-term interests. Bringing democracy to the grassroots level. That is what empowerment is all about. It has one more very important benefit, and let me say it right now, and that is, you will create new leadership which will rise from the grassroots level all the way to the state and maybe to the union government. Today what has happened? It's a top-heavy leadership. It's the same names that you've heard for the last so many years. I need not enumerate them. How many people have you heard of who have risen from the grassroots level? But that's not the case in the rest of the country. In the rest of the country now, increasingly, you see this phenomenon where people from the grassroots, from taluka level, tehsil level as it's called in north, rise up and go all the way to becoming union ministers. So that is the other benefit that will come about in due course of time, and that is what is required, because that is how the confidence in the leadership will come. Today it is sort of option A, option B, or none of the above. Let's have from A to at least about K or L and say, let's see, let them elect. 2002 elections was a landmark election in my view, and that is where this was in evidence, and that's why I say this with some confidence. People had all kinds of misgivings about the election to the state assembly in 2002. People did not expect a voting percentage beyond 12 to 15%, and some real optimists said 20%. I always held the view that it could be in excess of 40%. And I was labeled as an incorrigible optimist. in the event, 47% voting took place. So you could see that people know the value of their vote. So empowerment is empowerment. Give it to them, you'll find that it starts helping. Employment. How do you generate employment overnight? You cannot. But there are ways and means. When there is a drought, typically the government says, dig pits and fill them up. That's the kind of employment you give, to say at least this is one way we can pay people and they can use that money for whatever their requirements are, because the monsoon has failed or whatever. Similarly, you can do something which will generate employment almost across the board and almost overnight. I'll give you one example. Desilting of dams. It's an unskilled kind of job, from unskilled to highly skilled, because somebody has to operate those plants, the dredgers and so on and so forth. It will involve the transport industry to take away what has been dredged. It will involve local employment. And most importantly, it has 3 other tertiary benefits. 1, it will act as a flood control measure. If you have learnt a lesson from the floods of 2014, I hope the one lesson that has been learnt very well is that because the dams and the reservoirs, including the Wular and the Dal Lake and the Nagin Lake, are unable to hold that much water as they were holding a few years back, that water spills out over its banks and that floods the valley. You start this desilting process, in times to come it will control floods, if not prevent them totally. And the third and very important one is the electricity generation will increase, because there will be water. Today the sad part is the Uri Hydel project, which was supposed to make the valley completely self-sufficient as far as electricity is concerned, as far as power is concerned, is not producing even 25% of its, I'm told, of its capacity. Simply because there is not enough water. You desilt that dam and you'll find that more water will be available. It may well become a source of revenue for J&K. They can put that electricity on the national grid and earn some revenue for the state. So rather than looking up to the union government to give them some kind of a help financially, they can also say that this is something that we can give you in turn. So we're talking about employment. Next is entrepreneurship, or you can carry on this E thing to any level. But the fact is that if you can think in terms of short-term, medium-term and long-term goals, you can start industry. The relatively unpolluted climate of the valley, Ladakh, Kargil, even parts, in fact the entire area west of Jammu is relatively I wouldn't say pollution free, but far better off than the national average. Some industries which require that kind of climate or conditions can certainly come forward to set up industry. People talk of legal impediments, but what they don't mention is that there are options available outside those impediments. And if you are encouraging local entrepreneurship, then there is no legality and there is no other issue at all. Because if it's a Kashmiri person himself setting up an industry, then there are no legal bindings. So there are issues that we can put into effect without really. This is not rocket science. I mean, this is something that can happen almost immediately. What will be the impact? The impact will be, today a large percentage of youth, as I mentioned, what is the youth agitating for? They don't see a future. They want to create a future for themselves. And is that wrong? No. That is their right. And today we are talking about a young population of India, which is our greatest advantage across the world. It's exactly the same thing is applicable to J&K. The young population of J&K wants to do something. They want to see, why can't, for instance, okay, again, this kind of thing will not happen overnight, but I'm looking at, say, medium and long term. Today, why can't we set up an institute like IIT or an IIM or an Institute of Information Technology, one per region, straight away? What is the problem? Today there are many Kashmiri, I don't have statistics, but there are many Kashmiri students who are studying in these kind of institutes across the country. Would they not like to have an institute which is within their own state? Same thing with hospitals, high speciality hospitals. Why should a person from a remote region of Ladakh travel for weeks to reach a high speciality or a super speciality hospital? Why can't we have hospitals within the state where the locals can reach those, and that facility becomes available? This is again part of the first part, as engagement, reaching out to people, giving them something before they actually demand it. This is good governance, and I feel that these are not things which are outlandish or beyond or has a financial outlay which we cannot afford. Instead of setting up a new IIT in X place, put it in J&K. There should be no fear that vacancy will go a-begging. On the other hand, I would say people from the rest of the country should be encouraged to go and study there. That's the national integration. Direct, indirect, call it what you will. Which will have